Welcome to the No Ordinary Cloth podcast, where we explore innovations bubbling away at the intersection of textiles, emerging technology, sustainability, and craft. I'm your host, Mili Tharakan, a textile researcher and innovator. You're in for a wonderful treat today because I have a very, very special guest for us. She is someone who truly embodies innovation at the intersection of science, engineering, and fashion. A pioneer who's shaping a sustainable textile future and inspiring others to follow. She is the absolutely amazing Amanda Parks. Amanda is not just a materials scientist, she's a fashion scientist whose career has spanned groundbreaking research, startup building, and global industry leadership. Amanda's journey began with a dual degree in art history and mechanical engineering at Stanford, before a transformative chapter at MIT Media Lab with the Tangible Media Group, where she explored interactive design and wearable technology for her PhD. She's held key roles, including being the Chief Innovation Officer at Pangaia, where she made lab breakthroughs commercial reality and helped set new industry standards for biofabricated textiles and sustainability. Prior to this, she was with Future Tech Lab and Manufacturing NY, and she's founded a couple of her own startups. But her most recent and exciting gig is with Mothership Materials as their CTO, developing cutting-edge molecular separation technology to turn waste into valuable ingredients for next generation of textiles. Amanda's impact doesn't stop there. She's also a global advisor at Regeneration VC, working with top innovators and investors to fund the next wave of climate-positive startups. She has taught biomaterials at Columbia and Harvard. She's an international speaker, having presented at TEDx, COP, CES, World Economic Forum, and many, many more. Amanda's work has earned her recognition from Fast Company, The Business of Fashion, Vanity Fair, The Glossy 50, and many, many more. I could go on about her, and it is no exaggeration when I say Amanda Parks is an absolute rock star and legend in the world of emerging textile technology. Her curiosity, relentless drive, and deep multidisciplinary expertise continue to inspire and radically transform fashion and textiles as she redraws the boundaries between science and fashion. This is a slightly longer episode than usual, but it's worth every minute because Amanda lives and breathes textile innovation, and there is so much to learn from her. So join me now for an incredible journey with Amanda. Hi, Amanda. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to the No Ordinary Cloth podcast. When I first started putting together my dream guest list, even before I launched the podcast, you were right at the top. So I'm really glad we can finally make this happen. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while because the last proper long catch-up we had was way back in 2015, sitting together for hours at Mumbai airport, waiting in vain, I guess, to board our flight to visit one of India's largest home textile manufacturing facilities. And we were both really excited about it. But unfortunately, the flight never took off, but we had such a lovely time. You know, I just remember that conversation. We had lots of ideas that we were exchanging, and it was such a lovely memory. So sadly, we don't have 5 hours this time to chat, but hopefully we can cover just as much ground. And Amanda, I genuinely mean this when I say I've never really met anyone whose career has been as rich and vibrant and fun and consistently at the cutting edge as yours. It's incredibly remarkable. And I feel you've already lived the careers of 10 people in one. And you make it look so effortless. You know, you're just such an inspiration for me over the last decade and more. And what I deeply admire is the way you so gracefully dance between the worlds of science and fashion, two fields that rarely come together so seamlessly and beautifully as you have made it. And you blur the boundaries between these worlds. Again, make it look so easy, though I know it hasn't been, and I hope we'll get into that today. So I'm excited to learn how you've danced that dance for over 2 decades, and also to share with our audience what it really means to live boldly at the intersection of disciplines, industries, and possibilities. Because it's precisely at these intersections that I think that innovation thrives. And it is here that we will find answers to the biggest problems that we face today. So I hope our conversation today will inspire listeners to step into those intersections and to really own them, just as you have done.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to reconnect with you. And I can't believe that day in Mumbai was 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
Wow, because time is flying. But what a lovely intro. And you're right, we really connect on a lot of different angles. And I so appreciate your perspective as well. And I'm so happy to be here and to be chatting to you. This is a proper catch up. I hope the listeners can feel the kind of longevity of our connection and also just the kind of the different threads through the industry. I think you'll be the perfect person to talk to.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. I appreciate that. Now, you describe yourself as a fashion scientist. What does being a fashion scientist mean to you? What is the essence or the role of a fashion scientist?
Well, first of all, I think I invented that term. I needed a title for a lot of conferences or whatever. And because I'm very interdisciplinary, I think, first of all, like the job that I have now or the kind of roles that I play didn't even exist when I was in college. So this term really, to me, just encapsulates this idea that I'm looking at all the things about fashion, so that whether it be the creation of materials, the structuring of textiles, innovation in process, and at various points moving all into digital innovation as well, that are kind of surrounding fashion and the fashion industry. And I think that historically, fashion has been very removed from engineering school, and we can get further into that if it's about sort of a gendered issue. But I see fashion and explicitly textiles and garment creation as a very technical discipline, like everything from molecules all the way up to sort of patterning and production. And so I just wanted to figure out a way to encapsulate that. And it also is intriguing to people. I love that teenage girls are like, what's that? I want to be that. So that's also like a lovely way. It's a lovely way to kind of enter into a conversation where it's not as, all the traditional forms of engineering. I like to, it is more encapsulating and a little bit more fun.
Yep. I'm glad you brought up the teenage girls, because I've actually pointed girls to you as a fashion scientist, because I've come across many who say, I want to do fashion. I don't like science. It's boring, but I want to do fashion. I'm like, look at this person who is a fashion scientist, right? And she holds both worlds, and hopefully, that's inspired them to look at it as well.
To say that it's really started happening. I'm recognizing that this was like a way in for STEM for girls was when with wearable tech, right? Because the way that traditional kind of electronics is taught can be quite boring. But when you start to think about, you can make your clothes light up, that you trigger something in them. It's something they can relate to. I mean, not all of them, but in a stereotypical way, which is fine. And then it's a path in to be like, circuits aren't boring. Circuits are incredible, right? So I love that kind of deflection.
I usually don't start right at the beginning, but for the listeners to really understand your journey, I feel I need to go back to the start, all the way back to college. So you got your BA in art history and as well as in mechanical engineering at Stanford University. What inspired you to pursue degrees in both art history and engineering?
I mean, there's more and more recognition of interdisciplinary study now. But this was 30 years ago now, and so basically, I started doing mechanical engineering, but Stanford has a program called the D School, which is product design. So it's a little bit more holistic. You're studying anthropology and needs finding, and then also industrial design mixed in with the mechanical engineering. It's very hard because there's a lot of different requirements. But while I was doing this, we're learning, taking advanced physics and all of the engineering and thermodynamics, and you're not really learning about the history of engineering. Now, this is me telling the story backwards. I'm not sure I was this cognizant of it at age 17, right, when I started. But there was this idea of not really understanding the history of design. And so I kind of started taking art history classes, more looking at design history. I was taking a lot of anything that was offered in architecture and product design, industrial design, and of course, modernism. This was kind of the focus. I just wanted more context for what we were learning about and building. And it seems like now there is a little bit more of that, like understanding the history of what was built and why is very crucial to inform the next generation of what is built. So honestly, I started taking art history classes, and then I was like about 3/4 of the way through the degree, just because from my own interest. And I was like, let me just finish this. And then ended up writing an honors thesis about contrasting Italian futurist design, like these kind of obscure parts of, there's the art movement, but there was a whole separate design movement and how that influenced the later like 1980s Memphis movement in Milan. And so it was very, very directed at what I wanted to learn. But I was like, I have to say that I've been so grateful for the art history degree because it's also taught me to write really well. And especially visual writing and visual narrative or descriptive narrative has become, when I moved into grad school, writing publications about engineering and design things, it's been incredibly useful. So, yeah. But it was definitely, interdisciplinary. It didn't really make much sense. And then at the time, but I went on and I got a Guggenheim Fellowship in Italy. So I kind of did go down the art history track, but worked in galleries and, moved to London and worked at the Science Museum.
Really? Gosh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, maybe we won't go into too much of it, but I still felt the pull of the engineering science piece. And so exhibition design was kind of where I landed, where I could understand a lot of context. And even at the time of the Guggenheim, I was spending a lot of time with their head conservator, who was also working on the Sistine Chapel. Like, it was an incredible array of people. And I was considering conservation, right? So chemistry and art. And so understanding a lot about process, and then the exhibition work, which moved over into science exhibition work, and how do you do the informal science education and learning through exhibits, right? How do you get people intrigued by things? And then I ended up at the Exploratorium in San Francisco as an exhibit developer there. So really working literally on like the biology collection and the seeing and visual perception collection. Very much, that museum is called Art, Science, and Human Perception. Like, that's the title of the museum. So it really encapsulated that, kind of what I wanted to get at, that science is way beyond, it's much more, if we take a kind of human-centric focus of understanding science and think about it through the lens of ourselves, it's incredibly engaging. And we're only just beginning to understand anything about ourselves. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And then at some point along the way, you started to do a PhD with the Tangible Media Group at MIT Media Lab. How did your time at MIT shape your approach to your career and to developing new materials?
MIT changed everything.
Right,
there's pivotal steps, going to Stanford changes things, getting to Italy and living in Europe and all that changed everything. And then MIT, there's no place like it. It's just a fact. But the reason I had actually started the PhD, I started it as a master's, was at the Exploratorium. I was starting to develop more interactive exhibits. So this was, early 2000s, where we were just starting to have like sensing and actuation and, God, I sound like an ancient person now, but this was like pre-Arduino even, right?
Right, yeah.
For prototyping. And so I wanted a better understanding of how to build these things, quite frankly. My mechanical engineering degree was taking me to a certain place. I knew how to code, web stuff, but the interaction, it really was like, I got to connect the digital and physical world. And my advisor, Hiroshi Ishii, that was his specialty, tangible media, the intersection of the two. And he was also very focused on doing incredibly high-end, computer science, research, while in an interaction design research, while also knowing that art and design plays a huge part in this and it has to be addressed. So we just really came together. I didn't even necessarily mean to apply to grad school. Like, I got introduced to him. I just fell in love with the program and all that. So yeah, it was very, it just felt right. And a lot of the biggest career decisions have always just been like, it's like, I'll know it when I see it or I feel it. And then I'm like, that. So,
So when we spoke about doing this episode, you said you were starting something new and exciting. Of course, it didn't surprise me because you're always doing something new and exciting and way ahead of everybody else. So I can't wait to get into that now. This new venture, Mothership Materials. Love the name, by the way. So tell us more. What is Mothership Materials and what problem is it solving?
Yeah. I should probably just go back and I'll just do the 5-second explanation of how I got here, because it's going to be a real non sequitur. Like, after MIT, I founded an algae company, and we were developing microalgae photobioreactors, which sounds like it has nothing to do with textiles, and it doesn't. But it was electronic infrastructure on sort of how we use digital technology to influence the natural world. So we were optimizing photosynthesis. And so I worked on that startup for a while. And then I had a studio where I was doing wearable tech kind of consulting. And this was in around the time I met you, when we, and so I was doing consulting work with Intel and Google, and also some of my own side projects. Like I built the costumes. So I was working with this Parisian choreographer, and we together developed a show where all of the energy for the performance, for the lights and sound, was generated through movements of the dancers. So I developed costumes to do that, this electromechanical translation. And so stuff like that, that was high concept, but then I was doing much more practical wearable work too. So there was this kind of cross section. And so I kind of came into fashion through the back door, through this very technical lens. And at one point I was doing like structural engineering for couture. Like in New York, there's all these weird fashion jobs that you don't think about. They don't exist in other markets. Well, in Paris they do, but that was kind of interesting to me. So I was getting more involved. I'd be like the technical consultant brands would bring in to solve various problems. And so, that just opened my whole world to the actual fashion industry, not just me loving clothes as a kid, but now going, oh, okay, this is how it works. And, fast forward to a bunch of different startups and materials. I was running a fashion tech studio, and I was involved with an incubator for new material startups, and then got involved with a fund, because as you get more and more the startup world, you realize that the most important thing is who has the money and who controls it, and what are they funding, and are they understanding the kind of problems. And, we all are very aware of the problems around sustainability and environmental problems that the fashion industry has created. And there's a lot of back-end reasons for that. But knowing that we as the engineers and the sort of scientific people can have a say in how to help sculpt the future narrative of a better impact for the fashion industry, that was really engaging to me. And there was a real disconnect, and this goes back to Silicon Valley and how it works, around kind of engaging in, new forms of engineering and science that are actually work aligned with nature and in balance with nature, versus ones that are sort of in opposition. And I went to engineering school kind of bigger, better, faster, stronger is the way forward, and not taking into these other considerations. And then I've been reworking all of that, like just kind of reformulating in my head how we think about progress. And a lot of it is, we're not trying to overpower nature. That was kind of the Industrial Revolution, right? It's like we can win. It's like, no, we need to work in balance with nature. And that is, then you actually have even much higher growth, right? So that long-term sustained growth is about balance. So that's a whole different philosophy. But I was working with a fund, and then there was an offshoot brand, which maybe some of your audience has heard of, Pangaia, where I became the founding scientist there and the chief innovation officer. And we did a whole lot of work developing new material textiles. We're known as a fashion brand, and you might know our brightly colored tracksuits that went viral during the pandemic. But there was a whole research lab behind that, developing materials from highest level of biofabrication. Like we did the first ever biofabricated hoodie with Fibre, which is a brewed protein, like made from the DNA of spiders, so it's mimicked around spider silk. We're looking at all different kinds of natural paradigms, looking at waste valorization. So how do we start to utilize different kinds of biomass, or just like recycling, but at the highest levels of what's the future progress on those things to really kind of actually upgrade materials or put them in an infinite loop, not this kind of downgraded. So setting like protocols around the highest levels of impact criteria. So, absolutely no virgin polyester, like kind of creating this whole infrastructure around materials first for the brand. So that I've been working on that for the last 6 years, and I just recently left. But the point was that it really created this whole framework of how do we integrate not just R&D, but like kind of innovation, this evolution of innovation going directly into products, where, I was watching in academia, right? And I also, this whole time in the back end, I taught at NYU for a couple of years. I was at Columbia for 8 years teaching biomaterials. And then more recently I was at Harvard. So I've stayed very close to academic circles, and you see amazing things in the lab. They're not necessarily making it out into companies or into, and it's not, there's lots of reasons for that, about the kind of people who are doing it and, whatever. But just sort of wanting to focus on how do we really get through the hurdles of getting something into real product. And I can't say we solved it, but we did a lot of work to get forward into this as a real model. And it's a lot more complex about understanding how the fashion industry works, what are the levers to pull, what are the business structures, it's like all this thing, it's like go back to the spreadsheet. So that was there was a massive education inside the fashion industry, but also bringing my kind of innovation and my perspective on all these like the cutting edge science and engineering work, trying to bring that really inside fashion as well. So what I'm doing now is working on a molecular separation technology, which really can pull different nutrient streams from any kind of agricultural waste. So it's a waste valorization platform. Now, the reason this is still in fashion, okay, so a lot of the problems that we were having with getting new materials into product is the cost, right? So all of these innovations cost more, most especially because they're at the beginning, and there's always a sort of a hurdle where something like we understand this from every form of science. The first to make a drug, the first pill costs $5 billion, the second one costs 2 cents, right? Once you have the formula and you've done the work, and so there's an amortization period. So there's that to go in, and fashion is traditionally not invested in textile innovation. Like there's a whole weird splintering of where the money goes. And, innovation in textiles is coming from mostly the military and then a little bit around safety, but there's not a lot of actual directed money going in there. So that's kind of a strange thing to try to work around. But also it's just about supply chains and setting up the right stream. So, we have textile supply chains that are hundreds of years old, which have been developed and can be fantastic, but we need to start working on alternative supply chains, right? And this is, so for example, we were making, like my favorite textile that we made at Pangaia is called fruit fiber. And so we made plant fiber and fruit fiber. So we wanted to show that you could make a soft, lovely drapey jersey with no cotton, right? So we were going to use 100% reclaimed. So the waste of pineapple plants, banana plants, and seaweed. Now, not the food, right? But all the stuff that's cut off and just basically is burned. It's like it's a hazard for kind of the problem. So we're trying to turn something as like this is a burden. We're turning it into an opportunity. But it was very hard to get any. So you have to separate out the cellulose and process it and turn it into a viscose or whatever. It became, we started joking around that it was like couture waste because it was these very small streams and small producers. Process wasn't really optimized and the ingredients were expensive. So we could just never, there was no way to ever get the cost of these garments down to compete with organic cotton. Like we're not trying to go to fast fashion, like that needs to be over, but just to get it into a general responsible high street price. It just, the supply chains weren't there. So everything I'm doing is to move up the supply chain to sort out the ingredient streams. So that's really where I feel the innovation is. So what we're doing is this new technology, which comes from medical technology. It actually was developed as a blood separation technology. It's incredibly intricate. There's a biological capture particle. The IP is two-sided, working with like a centrifuge, a specific geometry of a disc, and it works like a magnet, where basically this capture particle can go through a solution. Like this one is intended to pull out cellulose. This one is intended to pull out glucose. You can pull out absorbic acid, proteins, lipids. So you're really separating out. You sort of sonicate the biomass, and then you do this kind of this separation centrifuging process, and you get clean, like really high level clean ingredient nutrient streams. And it's cost effective. There's a lot of reasons why it makes sense from a business point of view. That's what I can say. So we're just kind of getting up and started. The technology, the lead scientist who's one of the partners in the company, she's been working on this for 12 years. There's 9 patents. Like it's gone through medical testing. So we're like downgrading it because we already know it works super well for this one. We just need to we're just sort of industrializing it and making it lower resolution. It doesn't even have to work as well. So this is ideal engineering problem. So so that's what I'm getting involved in. And so we're going around and I've been obsessed with this like waste valorization where we're leaving, like for example, like all the sargassum blooms that have been happening across the Caribbean. So this seaweed there, and this is because of both climate change. So the water temperature is rising, and we have all different weird pollution, which is nutrients for seaweed. So they bloom, they're taking over beaches, they're killing ecosystems. Now, this is Algae and seaweed is an incredible organism. It has like lipids, it has everything, lipids, protein, cellulose, right? It's like a model organism of ingredients. So they're thinking, oh, they're like taking this away, carting it, burning it off the beaches in Mexico. This is like, we're burning gold, right? This is money, right? So if we can separate it into useful things, then this is how I'm seeing it. Like, this is my philosophy that I developed at Pangaia was called high-tech naturalism, where you look at the world from a place of abundance. So what do we have a lot of that we can use? We have a lot of carbon and we have a lot of waste, right? So these are the things that we can turn into useful streams if we put the innovation to work in the right way. So that's why I'm now the CTO of Mothership. And we're starting, it has to be also cross industry. So there's a lot of, say, for example, like food and beverage companies who have excess from their production. We'll take that and we'll turn it into, cellulose. So for all the textile industry to make any kind of what they call man-made cellulosic fibers, MMCFs, viscose, lyocell, which are, I think, the fastest growing component of the textile industry, I'm glad to say. And they're bio-based, so they can have a lot of properties of cotton, but because of the way they're kind of extruded or produced, you can also embed some synthetic characteristics into them. So I think it's an incredibly cool, malleable mechanism. It's like that intersection of where you're looking for something that has performance characteristics. You usually go to a synthetic, fossil fuel synthetic. If you want fluffy cotton, we still love that. It's great. We need some things that are in between. And if we can have this family of textiles, these MMCFs, take over all the synthetic categories, that's kind of the ideal. But the other thing that we're also going to be producing is glucose. And this is important for fashion. It's important for a lot of industries, but the rise of biofabrication, right? So the nature of how we're actually taking DNA from one organism, say a flower that is red, you take the part of the DNA that grows the red, put it into a different microbe, grow that, they produce red dye. This is across all industries, food, materials, et cetera. The microbes need to eat something. And what they need is a cheap source of glucose. And so it's been like kind of this looming crisis that as biofabrication industrialization rises, we've not had an affordable glucose source. And so it's a bottleneck. So we are going to be releasing the first ever glucose specifically for microbes. So as a product to go into the biofabrication chain. So this could feed, and this is also something that will get the cost down of biofabrication. So for example, like the biofabricated hoodie that we made at Pangaia was incredibly expensive. And there's all different parts of that process that are expensive, but we shouldn't be using like growing sugar to feed microbes is not the way forward. We need to be using a waste source just from an impact and balance cycle. So and then there's thousands of other ingredients which we can pull out from absorbic acid, oil, like smaller by volume things. But we're just getting started. Even lignin potentially for biofuels. Like we're getting inbound requests and go, oh, we didn't even think of that. Okay, it's that beautiful early time in a startup where you have to be very careful to stay focused on what you're doing. And we've got our first industrialization, happening early 2026, but the opportunities are endless. And I love that feeling where we are, there's too many things that we can be doing. And so we're careful to focus, but I'm collecting all of these things as future parts of the company.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I got goosebumps when you were explaining this. It's just
lovely.
Just incredible technology, Amanda. I mean, honestly, it's just fascinating. I mean, so many startups are trying to do little bits of this and, try and get one ways to produce one kind of material, leather, fiber, whatever it is. And you've just kind of really disrupted that space as well.
I think I see us as an enabler. I mean,
okay, yeah.
But in the sense that, I worked on a lot of waste valorization projects where the problem was that because of a lot of it was chemical, or you would be trying to get one material out and you destroy the other ones in the process. Not in a bad way. This is just how it was working, is complexity of trying to get different streams out of one thing. So I really want this to be a kind of enabler where people don't have to be like, oh, well, is that cellulose going to be too expensive, or can we do, so it's this it's a kind of a backbone. And it's honestly, like I just said, it's solving the problems that I was having inside the industry. I was at the bleeding edge of things. And I'm like, we're never going to get there unless we go upstream 5 steps and look at the actual cellulose that's coming out. So there's no amount of, the head of sustainability in a fashion brand going, oh, but we want to better this. It's like, it's not going to happen from that space. It has to go way upstream. So that's why I tell people, like, I'm still very much in the fashion industry. It's just, there's a couple of steps I got to explain to you why this,
Yeah.
why this.
This will get you there eventually. Brilliant. So you said it's not limited to any particular kind of waste. Any agricultural waste can be used with this technology. Wow.
Yeah. And so things like, the offcuts of a farm are like a very obvious place to start. And so, for example, like, we're potentially working with a cocoa farm in Granada who, and obviously there's a lot of pressure on farms to make money or to break even, or, just the pressure is crazy, and with the climate change and everything. So anytime you can have a secondary revenue stream from, because seen the prices of chocolate rising like crazy, and that's partly because of farming. So if we can get the farmers more money back on what they're growing, there's a lot of the pod that has a lot of other interesting things in there that we can process. So things like that. But then there's also like industrial processes, like say like brewer spent grain. Like there's incredible ingredients in what's left over from making beer, or so almost everything has some kind of residue. And as long as we are looking at like things like polluted sargassum, right? But we're starting with streams that we know what's in them. So if it's an industrial stream, like we know, so that's because then we can understand what we're going to get out and set up some standards for the process, right? We can't. It's like starting in the Wild West of like, we're not sure what's in this seaweed, like,
right.
But we will be setting up a sugar kelp processing plant in New York City.
Wow.
TBD, but we're working with the city here and in various ways. But they grow sugar kelp for remediation of the harbor waters, and being able to do something useful with that is the tricky thing with these kinds of waste streams is that we can remove toxins, or we don't remove them. We separate out what we want, and then there is still toxins there, and you have to dispose of them properly. But you're taking all the volume down. But you have to be very careful. Like we cannot have food grade ingredients coming from New York Harbor at this point, right? So you have to be working on doing other things with that. So if something starts food grade, then you can potentially put it back into the food grade chain more easily. It's still not direct. There's a lot of testing, and I don't want to scare people. Like this is by no means like, this is very regulated, everything that they'll be producing. Although the microbes don't care. The microbes
they'll eat anything. Yeah.
I know, but starting, there's so many different streams that we're literally analyzing, but starting with ones that are just more known and readily available, right?
And is the infrastructure heavy? Is this something that you can build nearer to where the waste is produced?
When I met the founders and they were looking for an engineering partner, there was things I was looking for. Having done enough startups, worked with a lot more, and also now I also am an advisor to an impact fund called Regeneration VC. So I see a lot of deal flow coming through. It's like what works, what doesn't. Like I've been through it for the last 20 years, and one of the things that's beautiful about the tech is that it's modular. So we don't have to build like $1 million facilities. It's basically a stack of discs that spin, and there's a kind of just a sort of motor infrastructure there. And those discs can be literally 3D printed. I mean, there's IP in the design, and there's IP in the capture particles that make it match and everything. But it's a kind of thing where we can literally ship those off or ship off a drawing. And so the infrastructure can easily be moved around. We're talking about paradigms of where it lives on a flatbed truck. So you drive it around, process it, or in a shipping container. It's, so the device itself has got like a, 4 foot by 4 foot footprint. There's some other things attached to pre-processing, whatever, but this is not, it's not infrastructure heavy. And that's a point that we could drive this onto a farm and process and get some ingredients there. So that was one of the things that I was really sold on, because I know people trying to set up, this needs to happen, but it's very, very hard in terms of getting the right fundraising, of like building entirely new manufacturing plants. And also from a impact perspective, from a carbon perspective, it doesn't make sense to be like driving waste around. I mean, you can justify a lot of things, but the more you can decentralize these kinds of things, the better it is. So then what you do is we will still be moving the product, but you're taking the mass and volume down by 10x, 100x, right? So then the carbon numbers start to make more sense. Even just removing the water. Like sometimes I get like freaked out about how much water we ship around the world inside of products. It's so crazy. Like using fuel to ship water is like one of those
Yeah.
kind of like when you
Yeah.
start to think about balancing moments of
Right.
carbon carbon impact.
And I love that it is innovation that was developed in a completely different sector and industry, and you were able to kind of bring that to the needs of our world. And I mean, this stuff is blowing my mind away.
I mean, interestingly, like I worked on a lot of technology. I think I somehow gravitate to them because one of my first algae biofuel startup was actually an innovation from the flat panel display industry. My friend was an optical engineer, and we pulled it in to work on distributing light for photosynthesis. So that kind of crossover, I think that's where a lot of the big ideas that can be sort of teased out, right? So yeah, I love those trends, and it takes somebody to be able to see it. And this wasn't me. This the other partner, she'd worked in ag tech, but it is an argument for kind of interdisciplinary education. Like being able to understand what's going on in one industry and how it can apply to another one is super, super important.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. You do that so seamlessly. Like I said, you sort of move between these sectors and disciplines and spaces. So like it's just very normal for you, isn't it? And that's a real skill. That's a skill that is so hard, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting because I mean, part of me is like, oh, do I just get bored easily? That's partly, I mean, but although I don't get bored when I really love something. But one of the things I think it's about, are you someone who's comfortable with uncertainty? Right. And there are some personality traits. Like I don't recommend this for everyone. It's like I love the challenge of solving the problem, but it has actually more to do with, well, I consider a lot of my job to be innovation diplomacy, where you're coming into one environment, say like a very traditional textile manufacturing environment in Italy or Portugal, right? They have processes that have been set in stone for like, 100 years, and for good reason. They're incredible, right? They're incredible craftsmanship and stuff. And you're trying to kind of disrupt and interrupt there. You have to do it delicately, and you have to like explain and be like, this is going to be better in the long run. We're coming to you because of your craftsmanship and because of your understanding, and we're going to maybe have you work like incredibly good leather craftsmen working with like a new leather that has been that's made of mycelium, has different characteristics. You tell us what's wrong with it. It's not going to behave exactly like leather. It's going to behave like something else, but you'll be able to do something amazing with this. So tell us its benefits, its limitations, right? So this balancing act of it, there's a lot of culture in it, and I think you can probably appreciate this. I know when we missed out on going to the facility, but just understanding like the traditional craft and manufacturing process of India and how you start to integrate new innovation there, you have to respect culture, and I think that's something that I have this kind of anthropological thing that is a good trigger. So I always say like I'm the nerdiest person at a fashion event. Like I'll be at there's a Fashion 500 gala and I'm like the dorky scientist, right? And then I'm at like a computer science conference or material science conference, and I am the most stylish person there, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely,
you just have
no
to
doubt.
be like very comfortable with kind of who you are, and and I always I like to put myself in rooms where I'm like the dumbest or least informed person in the room. That's the pleasure, to seek out the other information and the things I've learned, like from getting, like, for example, like the craftspeople. And I worked on a high heel project. We were re-architecting the stiletto, and it was people from SpaceX. I swear we had an astronaut on the design team. I had design reviews with an astronaut around the inside of the stiletto. That's actually a crazy story where like all these engineers, like the woman who started it, Dolly Singh, she was like Elon's head of talent at SpaceX. And she's like, what, we're building these rockets, and why do my feet hurt so much when I walk around the factory in heels? And all the engineers, who quite frankly were men, they're like, we don't know how a shoe is made. And then, they cut it open and they're like, this is outrageous. And I was like, yeah, that hasn't been changed since it was invented in 1920. It's like a rod, like it's like a metal rod, like, we're torturing women. So re-architecting that with new polymers, new structural innovation, like looking at how you displace forces. And we did this amazing, amazing project called Thesis Couture. But we went to the most traditional Italian shoe factory to have it produced. And we're like, can you build it around this new center? And we had to get them on board to say, how can you work with us? We want it to look and feel, like Leviton, or not feel. We want it to,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
want it to have a totally different inside, but have the same. And so those are fun conversations. But the amount I learned from being in those shoe factories that reapplies to other things, or like shoe manufacturing machines are some of the most intricate systems I've ever seen in my life. Like the moving components of robotics that are like, oh my God. So yeah.
But how do we do that, Amanda? I mean, a lot of the majority of the listeners here do come from the textile and fashion world, and they're curious about science. But how do we sort of encourage them to move further in? And you don't have to be experts at everything, but still be able to enable these kinds of exchanges of insights and be able to see something there that you can bring back into your world because it's a solution there. How do we encourage people to do that?
I mean, I think it's important, first of all, to always be curious about how things are made. And that's something that I just don't ever assume that it's done that way because it's the best way. Like there's reasons behind it. But I mean, now, I remember some of the most amazing things that I did, like as an undergrad at Stanford. And I know I was lucky, but they would take us to a factory where they were manufacturing cables. This sounds boring. It is not. Like, right. And if you like mechanical systems, figure out what you are interested in, first of all. But anytime you can see how something is made, your brain starts to work slightly differently and you see the product different. And now we have YouTube, and every factory has stuff online. You can say, how is this made? And like 1,000 videos will pop up. So also how it's made and what it's made of, those two, the curiosity of like, where do things come from for anybody in fashion, I think just starting there. And then that will and anytime you have an opportunity to go see a facility or understand a process, or even, and I don't, it could be like, yes, the technical factory. I love to like watch videos of like the French couture houses, that hand stitching. Oh my God, I can watch that for hours, right? So understanding like there's a lot of good reasons why those systems have developed. There's also ways that we can break them open. And like you have to be like, I think it's also about sensitivity and like a very high level of emotional intelligence. I think for someone in the science and tech realm, I do have that. I have like one of those rare Myers-Briggs things where I have the high emotional intelligence. And so there's a lot of, you have to fight the nerve to be like, I'm right. Like this is the Silicon Valley problem that people come in and go, oh, we're breaking everything. It's like, no, instead of like, move fast and break things, I'm like, move fast and fix things. Is that like, please, like,
yeah. Actually, you just talked about Silicon Valley because you were named by Vanity Fair as the 8 wildest women of Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, I did an interview, and then that's what my title came back as. So I'm happy for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I trained there, I lived there, I worked there, and I always felt I was on the edge. Like, and I don't know if this was like, there's a lot of gender stuff from the last 30 years, right, across technology. It's not a Me Too podcast, but even when it's hard to know, like, I felt kind of like an outsider inside of mechanical engineering. And I always felt like you blame yourself and go, oh, I must just not be good at this because it wasn't appealing to me to go in and get that engineering job or whatever. I was like very happy to like move to Italy and work in a gallery. And I think now I'm like kind of reprocessing, like that environment wasn't comfortable to me for a lot of other reasons. Not just that I wasn't good at it. Like I figured out that I am good at certain things that are part of that. And there's a lot of, so I think looking at like workplace culture, which we're much better at now. I mean, it's by no means perfect, but at least it can be recognized that, that those things are happening. So yeah, I think that's also important. Like you want to seek out, you want to be comfortable where you are, but you also want to identify like how much of it is you and how much of it is the environment.
Yeah, right.
And then go from there. Yeah.
Now, this technology that you talked about with Mothership, it seems almost the perfect solution, but I'm sure there's been some big challenges along the way. Could you share some of that and how you've navigated it?
To be fair, I just joined full-time last month. So we're very early. I mean, the technology has been in existence. Primary nature of the engineering work is done, and that's where there's all the patents and everything. So it's all the small things along the way to get this industrialized. And that's really the whole point of a lot of what people don't see. And like the breakthrough innovation feels like it's like 90% of the work, but it's not. like the implementation and like, for example, when we were working with like colorifics to get the first ever bioreactor put into a dye house, right? They were growing the live dye. That the engineering work on the bioreactor was done, but getting it implemented in the process and all that, there's a 1,000 tiny things. So this is like one of those like death by 1,000 paper cuts where each process, even if something we worked on in Italy, like it took us 6 months to get the power turned on the building, like just crazy things that you're like, there's no way to have known. So it's just this constancy and determination of each phase that you just have to go through. So it's all just considering all the small things as we get things up and running. And then again, there's making sure that the business model is so tight that nobody can ever say, oh, this isn't going to make money. And I hate to say that. Sometimes I'm like, who am I? Like I'm saying, because, like I've never been someone that's motivated by that. But it's just true that nothing is ever going to work to change anything towards more sustainable systems if there isn't a business model but there. Now, you need to look at the broken nature of the fact that we're still supplementing fossil fuels, right? So they get extra money and then, the actual like sustainable energy systems are tasked. It's broken in that way, but really kind of just to understand that the business model has to be there for it to become parallel. It's not like these systems cannot be charities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just being like locked tight on how that's going to happen or have a realistic projection. Like the first one is not going to be cheaper, but at what point will it become break even or the same price of doing other things or when they start to make money? And I think that's really how we've gotten corporates on board to say, this is the right thing to do, but also within X amount of time, which is pretty short, we will be able to be bringing you extra revenue in. And so you just got to get your people on board. So, yeah, but I think that the biggest challenge is to just stay focused on each tiny step of the way. And then also staying focused on not trying to do 20 things at once. Because as I just said, we could be producing 20 different products in all different streams and like choosing carefully. And that mostly comes from experience of having done enough startups where I'm like, no, in that one we went too broad and these kinds of things. So just these careful navigating things.
So your focus, you're saying, is going to be cellulose fibers to start with for the textile
Cellulose
industry.
and glucose are where we're starting. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the main things is that they are by mass and volume pretty much the largest amount. So you're removing the bulk of the material. It doesn't mean they're the most high value, but establishing those supply chains and in terms of there's definitely need and markets for them. But then we'll go into more specialized nutrient streams and things that can be, like it's great if you have a tiny amount of something and it costs $2,000 a kilo or something, right? Yeah. But the market opportunity is smaller for those very high. So doing that enough.
Well, how soon do you think you can get it to market?
Well, I think the thing is like, what does market mean? So we're getting our first industrial installation up and running next year. And then honestly, there's parts of this system where even if we don't do anything with what we process, it still pays for itself in terms of waste remediation. So there's that interesting first step of just getting it running does a certain thing where you're separating out water and toxins and whatever. And then there's the next point, which is it's the point of the company, but the market is to sell off the other things. So there's like two phases. So we have a proposal, but then there's even, we're a smaller company that we are working with that wants to use the cellulose right away. So we will start with some startups that are specifically interested in this and want to work with us on developing the right viscose or the right lyocell with it. We're not trying to become a textile producer or even really a yarn producer. So we could, but that's again, I just want to fix the first thing. And there's lots of people who know how to do that. So that could be out pretty soon if it's small volume, right? So we're working through those timelines, but there could be small amounts of product out by the end of next year with the cellulose.
I'm also curious to find out what waste you generate at the end of it and how you're processing that, or what do you have to deal with at the end?
Again, it's every stream is different, right? So if we take out, say, the highest percent, like the cellulose and glucose, which might be 80%. Oh, and the water, by the way, which we will pull out clean water. So that's also an important point.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because we can separate out. I mean, we might have to do a secondary process, or it depends on what is. If it starts with a lot of toxins, it's obviously more complicated and stuff. But just being able to at least pull out clean. If the ingredient stream starts clean, quote clean, we will be able to pull out clean water. And that's in itself is great. And then there'll be like a pile of everything else, which could be lipids or, different things that will be all bio-based. So that can go into compost or go into regular landfill, like responsibly. It's just biomass. It's really about, say, if you take the volume down by 10x, that's a big deal in terms of that kind of stuff. So we don't know yet. If we do start working on toxic streams, there has to be an agreement in place of like, we're not trying to take over. We're not becoming like a toxic remediator. Like we have to, like whatever they're doing now, whoever is in charge of this waste or whatever, we have to, there's a lot of like regulatory stuff which we'll start getting into, and this is why it's going to be the second phase of the business. And that, or for example, if we were trying to look at like all the waste sargassum that pulls up on beaches, like who owns that, right? These are like weird government infrastructure problems. So you have to come in and have a Loctite agreement on, we will process and make clean this, and this. We can't be thoroughly in charge of if there's arsenic in it or something, like like what happens. There's got to be whatever the government compliance and all that.
Yeah.
So.
Probably a really dumb question, but if it is agricultural waste, what makes it toxic?
Most things wouldn't be toxic. When I'm talking about the sargassum blooms, this is literally stuff that it's coming from the ocean, right? So there could be a pollutant stream like running from a river, whatever, all the ways that water gets polluted. Sargassum like takes that inside as the organism, like it remediates it by putting it into its plant, its organism, right? And so you're subject to whatever is potentially in the water being in the organism. So that's like where the unknown comes. So it's all a good thing because you're working to at least pull it out of these environments. But I imagine, and there's so much research going on in this, it's not my area, but of like understanding where the toxic flows are coming from. We're trying to stop all that, but what is even left in different places, like where things end up in the world, that's the whole science itself, right? Yeah. So we're not expecting high levels of toxins. There's just like, there's going to be waste that can just be, literally just biomass that we don't want, like lignin, which is, there's nothing dangerous about that, right? Versus something that should not be there and will contaminate groundwater or something.
Now, moving on a little bit to your previous role in Pangaia, you talked about that recently. We'll just do a little chat about it because everybody knows Pangaia. And you were the Chief Innovation Officer there. And of course, you were also named the most innovative brand by Fast Company on the Fast Company's list. So, that must have been an incredibly proud moment for you as well, being the CIO of the company. That was where you started to bridge that world of fashion and science, but in a very commercial way, right? You were kind of taking the science from the lab and bringing it out into the world, turning it into a business. What was unexpected and tough about that process?
Well, first of all, everything, but the thing that's interesting about Pangaia was we started as an investment fund, right? So I joined as like a scientific partner where there was a small fund that was working on investing in new materials, new sustainable materials, mostly for textiles, but more broadly around kind of fashion and product. And so we had, and when we started this fund, I spent like a year basically with some of the other partners, like going around the world and visiting labs, kind of getting them educated on the space, and then seeing the absolute cutting edge startups, labs, et cetera. First of all, the whole mapping of the space. And I got to spend time getting a really deep understanding of what's important, where things are moving, where the limitations are, like just a real kind of mapping out of what's coming next for innovation and what's going to make sense. And we were investing in companies that we thought were doing the right material innovation moves, but we were also watching the fashion industry backlash. And this is 10 years ago, right? Or maybe 8, where they were not incorporating quickly because, there's a big mismatch between like a tech startup and like an old school giant fashion brand. Like they don't even speak each other's language. We'll start there. But the assumption that the startup is going to have passed every regulatory test, it can deliver them 2,000 meters in 6 months, like the way that they put in a purchase order. Like you cannot just, a startup is not a supplier when it's beginning, so you have to work with them. So kind of we really started Pangaia as a way to be like, we should have a brand that demonstrates that you can make beautiful, responsible garments from these new materials. And let's create something that sets the standard. Now we started by making just like best in class organic cotton and, but just showing like it was made as a demonstration brand to the industry because we were getting so much pushback on like, oh, that's impossible. Startups aren't ready. And it's like, well, you have to work with them. So that was the model to show that we could do that. And then as we grew, we were getting into more and more complicated innovations, like getting the first ever, biofabricated hoodie made. And when we did get the brand up and running, like we had like 12 innovations in like 16 months or something ridiculous, which seemed impossible. But what was that? There was like first of all, there was like 4-year back end of me mapping out and developing those relationships. And then like 20 years of industry relationship. Like one of the things, in my first job, I had like a 20-year friendship relationship with one of the founders of one of the startups we were working with, right? So that stuff doesn't come from nowhere, right? And so the trust, and then, them trusting me to be like, I will do the best we can with your material. We'll work with the best artisans and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, the challenge was really in building trust everywhere, right? And even internally, right? Because we had, as the brand grew, we had a lot of people coming from traditional fashion industry who thought I was nuts, which is great. And then you got to get them on board, right? To see the vision and all that. And then, of course, the challenge was there's so much financial challenge. Like this stuff just costs a lot of money to make. And well, I got very interested in the business model of fashion brands and like, why? So the bill of materials is like 5% of the actual cost of what they sell for. And trying to break that down, like what, like the sort of the whole, first of all, the wholesale markup or, that whole thing is crazy. The stuff that goes into marketing. Yes, we need marketing campaigns, but do we need $10 million celebrity campaigns? Can we use the science? So really trying to shift if someone comes to you and says, the problem was more like, there was CEOs of fashion brands being, yeah, we want to do sustainability, but then the people who are actually purchasing the textiles or like the middle managers, they don't have the ability to spend 1 more cent per meter on something, right? So you have to put the decision-making into the right people to change. You need to change small things up and down that supply chain. And maybe you whack your marketing budget off and and you accept the fact that it's not written in stone that materials can only cost 5% of the product cost, or that you do spend more on manufacturing, or, these things that you develop like longer term. We did a lot of stuff that was like, we'll say we're going to buy this much over 3 years. So we get a reduced price at the beginning, even though we know it costs this much, so you have to be really innovative and get everybody on board. And that's not how traditional fashion brand, they're also the whole idea of trying to make 4 collections a year. You cannot do that with this model. And so the pressure, I don't blame the fashion brands. It's like they've been put into a structure where the pressure to just produce is overwhelming and there's no time for people to think or innovate. So you have to get out of that, like wrench yourself out of that cycle. We didn't produce, we would sometimes have new colors for new seasons, but we would do what we call material upgrades. We had our basic, like really successful design, and then we changed the material. We'd do these small upgrades to things, tweaks. So we were operating more like the way that you think of like an upgraded version of an iPhone. It's like there's slightly new features and it's like it's better. It doesn't mean that the other one was bad. It's just you're moving up that chain, as opposed to saying, oh, everything has to be new every 3 months. That was something that actually helped us. But I think it was just honestly, the diplomacy part, diplomacy and money, where like, the design was there, the innovation was there. It was moving it through and getting everybody on board. And like, it is going to take longer than you think. It's going to cost more than you think. And everybody get on board. Because there were these funny times, I remember early on with the brand where, we had an innovation team that were kind of scientists and technologists, and then the product design team and the production team who were coming more from traditional fashion. And we would make prototypes and stuff. And if 50% of the stuff made it into a product, we would be like, that's wildly successful. Like if you have a research lab and 20% of the stuff makes it into something, that's success. The product team, their perspective on the 50% was like, we were failing. So we had to have this like corporate conversation or this kind of company conversation around what it means to be successful with new innovation, that you are like, even if you spend a whole bunch of time on this and it doesn't become a successful product, you didn't fail. You were learning things from that. And there's only a certain amount of stuff. It's like, if you're not failing at stuff, you're not trying enough things that are hard. And so that was an interesting kind of cultural thing that we had to kind of get over, and all small things, but all small things that make giant problems, I guess, or just hardship.
Was there anything that you wish you had done differently during your time with Pangaia?
I think there's always like, oh, we should have gone harder on this. Like I sometimes think we should have done less. I know that sounds a little crazy, but I'm very proud of what we produced, but there was the nature of short-term versus long-term, right? How much we're producing, et cetera, and how do we establish different supply chains? I might have gone in like a little bit earlier on process tech. I don't know. Yeah, I'm still kind of thinking it over, but I think in general, just being mindful of the market and you cannot create a product that will sell itself on its sustainability. And we weren't trying to do that, but we did have like a very loyal base of customers we knew they were buying the brand because of the credentials. It was also very cool, but you can't expect that to keep scaling, right? Your brand has to be just as good and just as cool as the other things in their price point, which I don't think we did that wrong, but it's just a recognition of how fashion and trend works. And so the selling of the material coolness was not what we could rely on really for the long term. The other thing that this is just something that we just never got to, but I'm still very passionate about is developing something online to give people a sense of what the textiles feel like and act like. So I think we're missing a lot of language. So this concept coming from Lululemon, the science of feel. And I really think about this. We think about a lot, like when you're online shopping, there's always like size and fit, and there's like numbers and this and that. And you know that when you get the garment, like you're like, oh, it's just wrong. Like it's not that it doesn't fit you. It's like it's wrong. And a lot of this I recognized a long time ago, but I try to bring it up in conversation with people. It's like you don't like how that feels, how it feels on your body, how it feels to you, how it feels like it could be part of the fit, the way the garment drapes or something. But you can't identify that as it being the wrong size. And so how do we start to communicate? Like, I would love us to have a universal system in fashion that's like, and yeah, students listening, like start working on this and call me,
Yeah.
But like, so this is like, so even if it's just like featherweight to heavy, like we barely even talk about that. You just says like 100% cotton. I mean, do you know how many things that could mean? Like, right?
Yeah.
What's the level of stretch? Like, how much does it stretch? Is it smaller? So like that would be about knit structure. But how do we create a language that somebody can understand? This feels like your favorite old bed T-shirt. This feels structured. These different things. And I would love to identify the language, the descriptive language or pictures, or, just work more on that premise. And I think that would really change. We do so much shopping online now, and it's important. Like, we don't want to, we need a hybrid world where there's still stores to go to. I mean, I just walk around stores and feel stuff. Like, that's why I go in, right? And then I might end up ordering it online or whatever. But the point is to be like, you trust a brand. You're like, oh no, I know they have good textiles. Like I'm very particular about this. And so anything that you can help people identify those intangible things that like people in our industry might know them, but other people that are just random consumers, they say something like, oh, that feels cheap. And I'm like, yeah, it has like the shiny polyester, How do we start to help people identify that so that, we're what not to buy, or all the thing about returns and this, there's so many startups that are working on fit. And I'm like, no, that's not really, like, you're not getting to the essence of the problem with the online returns. So that's something that I would love to work on still. That needs to be part of a brand, but you need to have a coalition. This is what I wanted to do, like a coalition of brands. We're going to develop a universal language together. We're going to all agree on it and put it on our websites and create an industry standard around feel.
I love it. I don't know if my brother's going to approve me saying this, but he can only buy things not just by feeling it with his hands. He rubs it on his cheek. Like, even just touching it is not enough. He has to do that with a jumper or a shirt, t-shirt, whatever it is. And now zooming out a bit into the future of emerging textiles and technologies, are there any conversations within textiles and fashion that you're tired of talking about? What are the new conversations that the industry should be having instead?
I mean, I am tired of having the same conversation. It's nice to like take a little bit of a break. Like, I'm now working on like centrifuge tech, and I love the fashion and whatever, but it's good to when you're sitting there at the bleeding edge, the conversations that I was having 8 years ago are now becoming mainstream. So they can get a little boring, but they're still very important to have. But so I think that first of all, there's a whole narrative that like innovation startups in the space are failing just because they haven't come to market yet. And that's really frustrating because fashion timelines and like science research timelines are totally do not merge. And so, a startup that started 8 years ago and they're not fully industrialized yet, like that's totally normal if you were in any other form of tech. So we need to kind of normalize the fact that like fashion people like sort of catastrophize and go, oh, everything's failing. It's like, nothing has failed. Like, just calm down. Like,
Yeah.
like it's not seasonal, right? So there's that kind of conversation, which I am really sick of having, that everything's failing. Some things are failing, like things fall off, but we do, and part of it is also we need, this pulls into the industrialization scale up. That is really where all the conversation, we don't need not a lot more new, I mean, we have, like, of course there's space for new startups, but really drilling down on the stuff that we have that's out there that's working, and helping get the factory innovation, the factory scale up systems in place. There needs to be capital, there needs to be government buy-in, brand buy-in, factory, like producer buy-in, like just that's obviously the more complicated infrastructure question, which takes longer and stuff. But that's where really what we need to be doing. It's not just oh, this is amazing, and then poof, the next, just let's concentrate and let's commit. And then I think the other conversation that this is happening, but it's really confusing, is everything around regulatory. I mean, forget the US because we don't have any regulations anymore, but where everyone's looking to Europe for, the regulations around carbon and impact and measurement, and, what materials should be subsidized versus what should be banned. And in those things, I think the brands are getting scared and kind of pulling back, which makes sense because it's being forced on them, but you need to just kind of, people need to get on board and really have somebody in an organization to understand it and push it forward. And then like invest, the earlier you start doing the right thing, the less it's going to cost your brand later. So there's this kind of cost benefit analysis where it might seem a little bit expensive or terrifying now. And there has to be a little bit of a leap of faith for some of these things. Like if you're like, we hear brands kind of being like jaded, like, oh, whatever, we'll just pay the fees when they come. They're not going to come. Like, it's just not going to work. So I don't know. So those are the kinds of things that I wish. It's really confusing and, right, quite frankly, totally boring to me. But understanding what's coming down the regulatory landscape. And also, I wish I was doing this more and I should invest more time in it, but helping to shape the regulatory landscape with informed practices. So like there are some of the things when we would dig into LCA's really broken measurements there. And it's like they started from a space of like, this is, they're making a lot of assumptions. Every sort of analysis makes assumptions about the data that's coming in and what means what. And they're just things that haven't been drilled down properly. Like, for example, the water measurements, there's no differential in water. Like this one is to me the most broken. So if you say you have like a pineapple tree that is growing in a tropical environment that has unlimited water, rainfall, free water, whatever, right? The amount of water that plant takes to grow, that gets the same quote carbon measurement of the water as like if you're growing, something in the cotton in the desert of California that's being irrigated and piped in, right? So it's just about gallons, right? You have to have nuance on where the water's coming from, what's available, all of these things. So the problem is that like with our LCA of like pineapple and banana plants, they had really high water measurements. And it's like, no, it's a waste from some, first of all, it's already been grown as a food source. So first of all, you should cut every measurement in half, right? And then that is readily available water. And so those differentials that we need more nuance in the tracking as well. So that because you can skew, there's data, you can make anything kind of be anything, right? Like,
yeah, right.
But the whole idea that this material that was made from 100% waste, plants that are already being used for food sources, having a higher carbon footprint in an LCA than, like regular cotton that's crazy. And cotton even uses a lot of water. So those kinds of things, we have to get a little bit of like, okay, these numbers are not right. Where inside the data structure is it wrong, or it just needs more nuance? So that's something that we all need to be engaging with more. And that comes from practical expertise. I also am not even sure where to start. Like because I have had this conversation that's frustrating, trying to drill down on who actually wrote the equations in that spreadsheet. Who created the assumptions for each thing. And it's like there's a pass the buck thing where there's some sort of secret black box that even the companies that are doing the LCAs are like, these are the industry standards. I'm like, who made the standards? And the government. And then the government is like, we went to a consultant, and the consultant's like, well, that comes from science. And I'm like, it did not. So there's this like weird cycle of like, I don't think they're trying to like push it around in any evil way. It's just, it's confusing. And yeah.
Where do you see the field of emerging textile technologies heading in the next 5 to 10 years? What are you excited about?
I mean, I'm still incredibly excited about biofabrication. It's been, I mean, for the last 10 years, and I'm still totally on board with. Next week is the Biofabricate conference in London. It's the best conference of the year. All the new innovations. It just has so much promise. It's rebalancing with nature. It's using innovation at the highest level. It's taking very technical things from biotech, from another industry, applying them to this. It does have a lot of infrastructure problems and needs for capital, and it's complicated and all those things. I'm also very excited about all forms of waste valorization and what we can do on that front to start to it's just really all about getting rid of synthetics. So everything that we can do to mimic the different behavior and performance characteristics. And then, I have to bring this up because it's everywhere. I am excited about what AI can do, but not in probably the way that you're thinking. It's a little bit more about how do we actually use AI to work on biological and chemical formulations. So speeding up the early phases of R&D how do we use it to there's this problem and this problem, can we use it to help to have a second order analysis on a lot of things that would take research assistant, just a lot of measurements and these kinds of things that we can start to kind of fast track. So yeah, I think, I'm not saying we need 27,000 more breakthroughs. We need to concentrate, and that's what I'm excited about.
You briefly touched upon this. You are also a global advisor for the Regeneration VC Fund. Could you share a bit about this fund's mission and what excites you about this fund?
Yeah, I met them originally because they invested in Pangaia, and their mission was all about new materials that have better impact characteristics, and also things that are more consumer facing. They could be product companies, they could be materials. But first of all, incredible group of people, but with, first of all, aligned, coming from finance, but totally aligned on impact in the most pure way. So you just know it when you get to know people. So was always a big fan of they were making their decisions that were smart about both business side and impact side, and just have a real holistic way of thinking, and some out of the box things I get, doing some deal analysis on things, go, oh, wow, I wouldn't have thought this startup fit, but it's sort of, they understand that something that is up or down the supply chain or a sort of side service can be a real game changer. And so I love the kind of out of box thinking of, you're like, well, I know this is a material innovation fund, but that sensing technology matters because of X, Y, and Z. So they have a really deep complexity of thought around the ideas that they're considering. That's why I'm very happy to be part of it. And yeah, incredible analysis and conversation going into those decisions, which, having raised money and been in conversations with many, many VCs, that's not how all VCs work, let me tell you. So
Actually, I've had a lot of startups who are engaging with impact-focused VCs, and they feel a bit confused about how impact is measured. And I guess maybe that's a big problem generally, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And also, we're raising money with Mothership, and there's a real kind of, the impact funds definitely want to show that they have a rigorous process around impact analysis. Some of them, I'm like, you've taken this too far. There's still an element of risk and intuition around investment, and knowing that this idea is just logically a good idea, or the numbers make sense, right? That you can't overanalyze a problem to guarantee that it's going to work or be incorporated, right? So that, and this also goes into some of the regulatory things I'm talking about, where we're trying to figure out exactly what to measure. And if you lose your common sense in the middle of that, that's where the problems lie. So I do understand that. And I think, at Regeneration, we are trying to establish very clear characteristics of what we're checking for, without being so rigid that, if something has X, then we absolutely cannot invest, right? There has to be a kind of logic there. So I think that what's happening is the funds, and also it's a strange environment for investment. So we're being quite cautious, and little bit of not hiding behind like the analysis and stuff, but we swung kind of too far, and there was like, oh, open season on all these things, and they're like, oh, we do need to be tracking more. And I think looking at going after Europe's regulatory environment, understanding how that impacts, and then tying in the things in your fund to the financial regulatory and impact regulatory, carbon regulatory, to make it very, but complicated from that side as well. So I think if my hope would be that there's more open communication between the startups and the funds themselves about, like, the startups could push back and be like, okay, I see this analysis, but I also want to point out that that number doesn't matter for us for X, Y, and Z. So if there could be more transparency in those conversations, I think that would be really helpful. But I do sympathize with companies. I mean, me being one of them, being on the startup side, you do get confused by, well, is that actually the analysis, or what else is going on in the fund? And so it's not a perfect system.
I've been hearing startups say VCs are getting quite nervous about funding fashion-related, textile-related startups. How do you feel about that? And why might that be? Or how do we ease their nerves?
I think the main thing, there was a lot of money that went in about like starting like 5 years ago, and things have done well, but they're not hockey stick kind of growth structures for any company. So that makes people nervous, where the payout is a payoff, normal financial measurement stuff. But I think also the fashion brands have become a little cynical. I don't know. I'm trying to kind of read it, right? That if we don't see the big players actively making infrastructure change, then we need that support into the system. So it's a little bit chicken and egg. Like, the biggest problem is more the growth phase of raising capital. Like, if you're doing a new manufacturing technology or something, or process tech, you do need that 30 million at a certain point. And raising that strictly inside of fashion, I think that's where you need to go to, like, infrastructure money, and maybe in different places. Like, fashion doesn't have that history of putting in the 30 million for the payoff and stuff. So that's where there's some stalling out, that people are finding it really hard, that are focused on a textile innovation, and they need to build this whole new biotech facility, right? So yeah, I mean, I think people are nervous about anything, and I do think that, first of all the money's been going AI. That's going to crash out. 6 more months. There's no way that's going to stay up. That was the gold rush, and then people were pulling back on other things. It's going to rebalance. Everything with investment's always a pendulum. And I think the most important thing is that when things get lean, the really good ideas, if things are being analyzed more closely, generally the really good ideas will rise to the top and get the money. I've actually always done a little bit better in lean environments, because there's like signal and noise problems. It's like sometimes it's like the loudest founder shouting gets the money for not the right reasons. And so if there is like more attention to detail, sometimes that can actually help the good ideas. But I would say that if people are nervous about investment going into fashion, it's because the fashion industry is giving off, like, it's not great retail environment. They're not at growth. There's also the things with the changing things in China and Asia, and how it's affecting European American luxury. And so there's a lot of stuff that is just, the fashion industry itself is cautious and not at the best. We had luxury growth that was extraordinary for so long that people got used to it, that we should normalize that level of growth on luxury goods. So it's not that luxury goods aren't selling, it's just stabilized and like small growth. And so that's not a crash, that's just a stabilization.
So when I was doing a bit of research about you and where you're working and Regeneration VC, I looked up the team, and I came across Leonardo DiCaprio as a team member. I'm sorry, I have to ask, is that who you work with?
Every day. No. He put in upfront capital for the original fund, LP. And yes, he is technically a partner. I can't say I have analysis calls with him, but he is part of the fund. He's, put his money where his mouth is, and put in the money, and is a big supporter. So it can't hurt.
Brilliant. Well, I wanted to ask you about Manufacturing NY, but I can see that we're way over time. So I'm going to do a quick run through a little bit about your career, because I think it's really interesting for the sort of younger audience who's starting off, and how they navigate that. Maybe your story is really inspiring for that. Like I said, you've kind of done 10 people's career in one. wasn't intentional that you sort of, did so many different things, but how did you carve out such a pathway, and how did you stay so agile in your journey?
So I think the first thing, which I had mentioned before, is just like following your intuition in a way that, this is the right thing. You maybe can't justify like you got to trust your intuition and be true to yourself. I mean, of course, there's times you're going to take jobs that you need money or whatever. And quite frankly, like some of the most random jobs I had that were very much like, I have this temp job to make money, have informed other things in different ways. So every experience is valuable. And if you keep your eyes and ears open and learn things from being in environments, that's really important. And then follow your intuition. I think that this is one of those tricky ones where I feel like I've never really taken a job just for like money and security, which I'm not saying that's for everyone, right? It's like if I've lived like a high risk kind of, which I'm doing fine, but if I had gone down a more traditional Silicon Valley track, I'd be a lot wealthier now, right? Quite frankly. So you got to assess what you want from your life while you're doing it. And I support, and I think any sorts of decision making that if you're true to yourself and you're like, this is what I want, then, do that. So you have to, like, if you're not interested in high risk, or you're not, it's torture to be bored in your job. This is what I think. It's torture for me to be bored in my job. It's not worth the whatever excess of money, like what you're balancing out your value system, right? And I think it's more about life and like how you want to live. Like what's the phrase, like, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life. So that kind of thing where I'm like, I'm flying off to, Indonesia and going checking out this stuff and just I'm like living. It's like, where does work end and life start? And I don't consider myself a workaholic. I have a very active social life and everything, but it's just this idea of like, I'm always taking in interesting information and observing in nature, and I'm an active scuba diver, and just having this kind of depth of your life, and hopefully parts of that inform your career in a logical way. And this takes a long time to figure it out. I mean, your whole 20s are like, oh, what's going on? Like, basically, like, oh, can I survive? Like, and hopefully you get something out of it that you find meaningful. But I think the pressure for every single thing to be like calculated is also weird and arbitrary. And I also think that people go out after college, or even after high school or whatever, like be in the world a little bit. Like I like definitely tell students now, like when they graduate undergrad, like take time off before grad school, because grad school is a time when you really need to know who you are, and or you get more out of it if you do. So be in the work world, and don't like, you're not wasting time before you go back. You're like figuring stuff out, and you're like, and maybe you fall in love with something totally different or whatever, right? So those sorts of things. If you've only ever been in school your whole life. Yeah. And then also I think traveling and just anything that opens your eyes to things is really important, and let that stuff in. So absolutely, I have never made a 5-year plan. I'm not sure that's right for everyone, but I'm like, oh, that would be so limiting, because what are all the new things that are going to happen in 5 years? Like, I'll be behind. So it's fine to be like, oh, I should have like some goals about where I want to be in terms of like structure your life. And then I stay excited with new ideas. And so every opportunity to kind of like, I'm constantly like reading up on other things, which I don't know how this fits yet, but I can't get it out of my mind. Like right now I'm obsessing about DNA data storage. Talk to me in a year and I'll tell you why that matters. I mean, it does in terms of how it's storing data but like if something sticks in your head, just let yourself have that as a backgrounded thread. Ooh, all puns intended. And you'll see when it pops back up. So I don't know.
What were some setbacks you had in your career, and how did you adapt or work around them?
I think that, at certain points, I probably should have taken a more stable, focused corporate job. Like, you know what I mean? Like when I came out of grad school, I spent a lot of time kind of spinning my wheels, working for myself on projects and not really knowing. Sometimes it's okay to just be like, you're not compromising yourself if you're like, I'm just going to go into this work environment for a little while and concentrate. I think I should have done, I don't know if it's called that a setback, but at certain points where I should have done that. And I didn't give myself that. It's kind of like a little bit of like downtime or something, or, like, it's a reframing and regrouping kind of thing. For this last transition, I gave myself the time, but that comes from experience. So I think the setbacks would just be like time that I spent kind of spinning my wheels on various things that didn't go anywhere, or staying a little bit too long in some situations where I think I sort of intuitively knew you have to be kind of brave and figure out when is the right place to go. Like I usually do know with intuition, but sometimes like following up on things, you're like, I know this is cool, but you're like, but is it really embodying what I want it to be for myself and this and that? And sometimes going into something more traditional for a while can build up other things in you. So that's what I would say is like something I would have changed. It's like, I don't know if it's a setback exactly, but I think it could have been, well, for further along. I don't know. It's a weird thing when you're trying to really work at the cutting edge. As long as you stay there, then you are kind of making leeway. I don't know.
Well, this is a question from a previous guest of mine. What has been the best bit of advice you have been given, and how has that been used in your career going forward? This is Victoria Nickerson.
I know I'm like notorious for like, I've had obvious mentors and like, my advisor from MIT and John Maida and like the people I think of and admire deeply, but I'm not one of those people who's like, like advice centric. But I think that like the kind of like the staying true to who you are and being weird, like I think there were people trying to tell me this early on, like when I was sort of like, oh, I need to fit into some engineering box or this or that. Like there were older people in various environments that were like, no, stay weird.
Yeah.
Like be who you are, it's going to turn into something. So I think that is kind of the best advice that I got. I mean, sometimes directly, but sometimes indirectly. Like even when I was at MIT and I was chasing stuff down, there'd be certain people who they'd be like, no, keep going on that thing. You don't know what it is yet, and I don't either, but that makes you you, and that's why it's important for you to be here. Like those kinds of things to stay yourself in any kind of environment that's trying to kind of push you to conform to something. Yeah.
And what question would you like to leave for the next guest?
Mm-hmm. So if it's kind of related to fashion and textiles, I think I really like to understand sort of where are people's perceptions about like why textiles matter, and like how do we figure out to bring them into the narrative of very important technological innovation and like a key part of how we live, how we work, how we experience the world. They touch on every single supply chain, agricultural, manufacturing, everything, materials. How do we think about bringing that to the forefront of consciousness and not stereotypical, oh, fashion's just like, throw like Vogue and it's trend, this is that. No, this is like deep life source of a lot of like it, in the same way that you think about construction and food and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of the question I would put out there is like, how do they, think about it inside of their own working career, but also how do we like kind of shift the public perception?
Actually, this is a project I've been wanting to do, is to like rebrand textiles. I feel like the whole industry needs a bit of a rebrand and educating, the general public about what it is.
Like this idea that it's superficial to care about that. And that, and I would love to, not because I think that it's because it's my work, so it's important, but it just literally like, I think the misunderstanding that it's not a fully part of your life, right? That it's not integrated, or that it's not a cutting edge field, or not something that is like actively determining a lot of like very important industrial decisions and climate change and all these other things.
Absolutely.
Like,
You travel around a lot, you juggle many things at the same time. How do you maintain your mental health and well-being while doing something that you love so much?
Yeah, no. And I think, that's also one of those things of like setbacks or whatever. Like I've given myself pneumonia a couple of times over the last few years. I have started pulling back and just recognizing like it's when you're on the road, like it's okay to just, I would have these really hectic schedules of a month or whatever. And like, oh, I'm in a new city. Like I have the day off. I should go run around and see. It's okay to just be in bed and like do bed rot. You need the downtime and like not everywhere. You can't do everything at all times while you're kind of out in the world. So just literally like, I just need to like shut down sometimes. Like I'm an introverted person. It doesn't seem like it, but I need the systems to turn off. And I sometimes would like really beat myself up about it. I didn't take advantage of this, that. And it's like, it's okay. Like I've like, been forgiving myself for that. So that's one way to try to take care of yourself. And then also, like, I have friends all around the world, and love catching up and spending time with them. They bring so much joy. But also, I do not always overly index on talking to everyone at all times. Like, I think that there's, people understand that if you live in different places, I have tons of friends that I can not talk to them for 6 months and pick up and see them in a city and go back to exactly where you were. And so I think the quality of people that you keep around you makes a huge difference. I mean, that's the main thing, right? Family, friends, etc. Yeah. So.
I think a lot of founders, young startups, early startups really struggle with that. And there's the founder burnout that we're all familiar with. Yeah, it's so important to keep that side of your life. It feels like every minute has to be focused on building that startup.
No, I think that's like the direct route to failure. Like, if you don't take time off, like, you have to work hard, but you have to be efficient. Like, people think they're like, oh, you must work nonstop. And I'm like, not at all. You got to know what you're focused on. And I don't do everything perfectly. I'm like, no, I absolutely, like, I haven't answered my LinkedIn messages for 2 months, or, there's things that fall off the plate. And I'm like, I'm okay with, you just got to make peace with, like, I'm okay with that. And I really do not believe in that Silicon Valley, like, work 100 hours a week and you'll get, no. And also that's not what you want your investors to be pushing you towards either, because the burnout thing is real. And all startups are a marathon, they're not a sprint. And so.
Where did you grow up, Amanda?
In Redondo Beach, California. So a little surf town southwest of LA. Yeah. So, although my parents are Northern Irish, so I'm British.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so they came over from Belfast and Enniskillen. So I have family spread across the UK and Ireland and in California. So real hybrid British California upbringing. Makes no sense.
You said you were quite shy growing up. It's hard to believe that, knowing you. But what's something that you enjoyed doing as a teenager? What did you used to hang out and do?
I mean, I played volleyball, like, loved it, like, all the time. I did everything about the beach. Like, I was a total beach rat. So, like, skateboarding, biking, like, just brought me joy. It still brings me so much joy. Everything involving the water and the ocean. And then, I also like just kind of design just for aesthetics sake. Like, I wouldn't call myself an artist, but just creating things like colors, sewing, interiors, just, that whole kind of just area of design just brings me a lot of joy. So.
And when you were young, did you dream of becoming, I want to grow up to be something?
I don't remember having like, oh, I'm going to be this, but I do remember the first job that I remember thinking, oh, that's a job I want to have, was at Disneyland. They have this position called the Imagineer, they work on all of the engineering of, like, the rides and everything. And it was, I didn't know how to articulate it, but that is the combination of, like, aesthetics and engineering, but I just never heard of it before. So I was like, oh, I want to be an Imagineer. Like, somebody gets to work on this as their job. I think Imagineer is still a great term.
Yes, I love it. When did you start working with textiles and fashion? Was this an interest you always had on the side?
Yeah. And I think this is an interesting thing. Like, I was one of those kids who would be, like, obsessed for, like, one whole year. 5th grade, I only wore yellow, like, different tones of yellow. And then there was another year that was all pink. And I was incredibly, like, I would drive my mother crazy because I was just really persnickety, but about this. And I just loved it. It's always, again, I can only say this backwards, but this means of personal expression, where I was kind of a shy kid, but I loved loud clothes. And also just a very attuned aesthetic sense, like just a sensibility of, I love texture. I have kind of like hyperactive sensing, like in my skin. And there's just, I was very sensitive to all different kinds of texture and textiles and color. And so it was very much a love. But interesting, at engineering school, I was good at math and science as a kid. So I was like, okay, I'll go in engineering. I didn't know that you could also do fashion, that fashion was like seen as, oh, that, like, why would you do that if you can be an engineer? There was a pejorative thing about it, which now I'm like, absolutely not. Although I'm very grateful that I did get the engineering basis first. And then I just, as we were doing this digital physical interactivity, I was the only woman in the group for a long time. I was the first woman to get all the way through the program. There's a whole other kind of story there about MIT and the changing gender roles, but they were talking about the tactile nature of digital physicality, and everything in the group was wood, metal, or plastic, right? So I wanted to bring in softness, and I just really started kind of studying material characteristics and how kind of materials and different soft materials change when you're putting different sensing and actuation modalities inside of them. And this is where we start talking about wearable tech. But it did kind of start as a material exploration, and also from the psychological point of view. Like I was doing a lot of work on robotics at the time, like modular robotics and perception. There's interesting perceptual studies where if something is like hard and rigid and moving towards you, you have a different feeling than if something is soft. So there's very specific sensory perceptual capabilities, and this is what is missing from a lot of modern technology. I think like we can have it be you can have a lot of different modalities that haven't been fully tapped, and the reason is that it's really hard. Like when something is soft, it's less defined. We're talking about the perfection of the ones and zeros of code, moving into this really amorphous nature of nature, where we're talking about molecular structures and things that are, just harder to define. And textiles are kind of the ultimate in that because, they're incredibly hard to create. The behavior, like it's one of the areas where in computer simulation, it's like the hardest thing to create the visual simulation of cloth moving or hair, so these things that are soft are really the pinnacle of this technology. So I started studying that. And at the same time, when I was looking at different materials, I was also started to look at different organisms and thinking about nature, and ended up getting kind of obsessed with algae. That's another story. But thinking about how digital technology can kind of manifest in nature in different ways. So like how the change in chlorophyll can be like in a plant, like in photosynthesis, can be a measurement of time. And these different sets of things like the state change of water when it goes from, say, liquid to steam, and you can use this as information and using the element of heat as a pixel. So things like this that were very kind of ephemeral, and I used to call it like slow media. I think all these words don't make any sense anymore, but just thinking about different temporalities, like that's not just like what is in your phone or an electronic device, but we can have the digital nature of things be explicit in a material environment in different ways. So basically getting away from screens, really.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Textiles is so powerful. I believe it can fulfill our senses and our soul, and we engage with textiles far more intimately than with any other material around us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like to say to people when people say, "Oh, fashion's not important," because I got a lot of like backlash. I mean, I remember at one point the Media Lab the MIT Alumni Magazine did a little piece on me. This was a few years after I graduated, and I knew I'd made it because I started getting Twitter hate. Where there were some guys that were coming after me like she's wasted her degree, she's working in fashion, or whatever, she took up someone's spot, that kind of stuff, right? It's like girl, but that whole idea of it not, it not being important, and it's like if you think about this, there's not a single person in the world who doesn't own a textile, like a basic need: food, clothing, shelter, right? And so you interact with textiles every day, no matter what. And there's not every single person in the world has a phone so these kinds of things of how very, it's a necessity, and it's primitive and yet so incredibly complicated. Like we have the history of textiles and what we have from thousands of years ago, what people were able to create. I still get blown away by that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, the Jacquard loom was the precursor of the first computational device. And I don't know,
exactly.
We can talk more about that, but encourage people to look that up if they don't know that fact. But, when people say fashion or textiles aren't technical, I go, well, that's how we got computation.
Yeah.
Read.
I know. Mic drop. So could you share about maybe a piece of textiles or garment that you have that holds very deep personal meaning and value for you? Something that you hold on to, and it's maybe sitting in the back of the cupboard. You'll never let go of it.
Okay. This is interesting. I still, this is a stereotype one. I still have my baby blanket, and I just brought it back home with me recently from my parents. And so, yeah, that whole idea of it's like everyone's, it's like kind of shredding and decaying, but it's still soft. It's like that. So there's so much there with that. And I have like visceral memories of it. I also think that textiles hold for me, and I don't know if this is everyone, but I definitely have memories that involve a particular garment. Like I can look at a dress and go and remember the time I had at a particular event. Or so there's a real nostalgia and a real storytelling for me there because they're close to your body and they're also like they represent an image and also potentially like can be something ceremonial or symbolic, right? Like if you're dressed up, that kind of thing. Not for everything, but I brought back my prom dress, and so this is like an spiritual thing, but it was atypical. So it was like it's fusion sequins and short. It doesn't look like other this was me being like, I'm doing this, short little
Love it.
but I just remember like it was like the most sophisticated thing I'd ever worn, and just like really lovely memories of just and also just feeling fantastic in something, right? Like that idea that what's it called? Enclothed cognition, that the things that you put on your body can actually change your performance, or it changes your perception of yourself. Like they did studies where if people are wearing lab coats, they perform differently than if they're not, or these things. And it could be uniforms, but there's all sorts of symbolic things. Like it's real. Like you put on something, it makes you feel confident and better, and then your behavior changes. So I know I'm trying to think of like some more. I mean, I have so many. I potentially am a clothing and shoe hoarder, but
Yeah.
I mean, I like to say that I'm collecting amazing vintage things or whatever, but it's hard. It's hard to throw away things that you have. I mean, I can tell you, like, I just encountered this pair of pants and I was like, oh, I gave my first talk at Kai in those pants. Like, I have a real, like, a lot of, like, it's an active trigger for me. And I don't think maybe that's not for everyone, but it's I feel like I'm throwing away photographs or something if I get part of like.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I love that. Amanda, that has been such a wonderful conversation. I feel like I've already gone way over our time, but I feel like we could.
And now I think we should switch over and talk about your career, but we'll do that when I see you.
We'll do that offline another time, but it would be really, really lovely to catch up properly again. And thank you for your time, just your wisdom, your joy. The curiosity. I mean, that's the word for me. If I had to pick a word for you, that is curiosity. And you're like a sponge that just absorbs everything and everyone as well, I think.
Oh yeah, that's lovely. I do love people and I love ideas. So yeah.
Absolutely. And your passion for what you do, it really comes through. It's true. You could have been making millions working in a tech company, but I think the diverse experience you've had has been incredible. And I mean, really, the fashion textile community is so lucky to have you sort of come into the space and really move things and change things and question things and develop innovation as well. So thank you for being an inspiration. Thank you for being my inspiration, and really looking forward to Mothership Materials and all that it's going to grow up to be. Good luck with that, Amanda.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lovely, lovely conversation.
Wow, what a whirlwind of a journey through the mind of an innovator. I'm absolutely blown away by Amanda's latest venture into waste valorization, where she's adapting cutting-edge technology from the medical field to deliver a scalable, affordable solution for the textile industry. This kind of cross-sector disruptive innovation is exactly what's needed to bring about the rapid transformation our industry so urgently requires. Hearing about such technologies fills me with genuine hope and fresh energy. I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, if you'd like to learn about waste valorization for creating textiles, you can check out a few of my older episodes. For example, way back in episode 2, we look at how garden waste was being converted to leather. So that's episode 2. Then episode 14, we look at spinning yarn from potato plant waste. Episode 15, we're talking about brewing beer for bio-leather. And if you want more of an overview of biotextile materials and innovations in the space, check out episode 16, where the creators of Future Fabrics Expo, Nina Morenzi and Amanda Johnston, share a wider industry perspective on sustainable textile innovation. You can find the links to these episodes in the show notes. Please share this episode with anyone who might find it inspiring or valuable. Your support to spread the word about this podcast is deeply appreciated. If you enjoyed the episode, consider buying me a coffee using the link in the show notes. It helps me fuel those late night editing sessions as I bring you these stories. A review from you would also mean the world to me. Thank you again for joining me today. Stay tuned for more episodes and don't forget to subscribe for more conversations at the intersection of textiles, technology, craft, and sustainability. Until next time, I'm your host, Mili Tharakan, reminding you that there's no such thing as ordinary cloth. Every thread tells a story.